Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez pressed her back against the cold metal wall of the Black Hawk helicopter, feeling the familiar vibration of the rotors cutting through the night air. The rhythmic thump, thump, thump had become like a heartbeat to her over the past 18 months, serving with the 75th Ranger Regiment. Tonight's mission was supposed to be routine: extract a high-value intelligence asset from a compound deep in hostile territory. Maya glanced across the cramped passenger compartment at her 5 teammates. Each face was painted with the same dark camouflage, but she could read their expressions like an open book. Thompson was checking his rifle for the 100th time, a nervous habit that had kept him alive through 3 deployments. Martinez was staring out the small window, probably thinking about his newborn daughter back in Georgia. The others sat in the practiced stillness of professional soldiers who had learned to conserve energy before the chaos began. 10 minutes out, the pilot's voice crackled through their headsets. Maya felt the familiar tightening in her stomach that came before every mission. Not fear. She had trained that weakness out of herself years ago. This was anticipation, the sharp edge of focus that separated Rangers from regular soldiers. The helicopter banked sharply to the left, following the mountain ridge that would mask their approach. Maya had studied the terrain for hours, memorizing every peak and valley in their flight path. The extraction point was a small clearing surrounded by dense forest, exactly 300 meters from the compound where their asset waited. "Rodriguez," came the voice of Captain Hayes through the comm. "Your first rope. Set up the perimeter while we bring him out." "Roger, sir." Maya's response was automatic, professional. Being chosen as point meant Hayes trusted her judgment more than anyone else on the team. At 26, she was the youngest staff sergeant in the regiment and definitely the only woman. Every day she proved that the controversy surrounding her selection had been misplaced. Tonight would be no different. The helicopter began its descent toward the landing zone. Maya could feel the change in air pressure as they dropped altitude, her ears popping slightly. Through the window, she caught glimpses of the rugged landscape below, rocky outcroppings and thick pine trees that could hide an army of enemies. Intelligence reports suggested the area was clear, but Maya had learned to trust her instincts more than satellite imagery. Suddenly, the helicopter lurched violently to the right. Maya's shoulder slammed into Thompson, sending his rifle clattering across the floor. The aircraft pitched forward at an impossible angle, and Maya heard the pilot shouting something about engine failure over the intercom. "Mayday, mayday, we're going down! Prepare for emergency landing!" Maya felt her training kick in immediately. While the others scrambled to secure loose equipment, she was already calculating trajectories and escape routes. The helicopter was spinning now, rotating slowly as it fell toward the earth like a wounded bird. Through the window, she could see the tree line rushing up to meet them. "Brace for impact!" Captain Hayes shouted. The world exploded into noise and chaos. Maya felt herself being thrown sideways as the helicopter struck something hard, probably a tree trunk. The passenger door beside her buckled inward, then suddenly burst open. The safety harness that should have held her in place snapped under the tremendous force of the impact. Maya felt herself flying through the open door, tumbling through space with nothing but darkness below. Time seemed to slow as her mind processed what was happening. She was falling from a helicopter at 300 feet above ground level. No parachute, no safety equipment, just gravity and the unforgiving ground waiting below. Her Ranger training took over even as she fell. Maya spread her arms and legs wide, trying to create as much drag as possible to slow her descent. She had studied enough physics to know that increasing surface area would help, even marginally. Every fraction of a second counted now. The forest canopy rushed toward her like a green ceiling. Maya could see individual branches now, thick pine boughs that might break her fall or might impale her. She had perhaps 2 seconds to make a decision that would determine whether she lived or died. Maya twisted her body, aiming for the thickest cluster of branches she could see. If she hit the right spot, the interlocking limbs might catch her like a net. If she missed, the fall would certainly be fatal. There was no middle ground. The first branch struck her shoulder with devastating force, spinning her body around. The second caught her across the chest, driving the air from her lungs. Then she was crashing through a maze of pine needles and wooden limbs, each impact slowing her fall but threatening to break bones. Maya felt something snap in her left wrist as she grabbed desperately for handholds. A branch caught her combat vest, holding her for a split second before the fabric tore. Another limb struck her helmet, sending stars across her vision. But gradually, impossibly, her speed decreased. She came to rest 15 feet above the ground, tangled in a web of broken branches and her own equipment straps. Maya hung there for a moment, afraid to move, afraid to test whether her body was still functioning. Blood dripped from cuts on her face, falling like rain onto the forest floor below. Above her, she could hear the distant sound of the helicopter's final impact, followed by an ominous silence. Orange light flickered through the trees. Fire. Her team was up there, possibly injured, possibly dead. Maya knew she had to move, had to find a way to help them. But first, she had to get down from her precarious position without falling the rest of the way. Maya tested her limbs one by one. Her left wrist was definitely broken. She could see the unnatural angle even in the dim moonlight. Her right shoulder screamed with pain, probably dislocated. But her legs seemed to be working, and that was what mattered most. Carefully, Maya began to untangle herself from the branches. Each movement sent fresh waves of pain through her body, but she forced herself to continue. Rangers didn't quit, even when hanging upside down in a tree with broken bones and enemy forces potentially closing in. It took her 20 minutes to reach the ground safely, using techniques she had learned in survival school but never expected to need. When her boots finally touched solid earth, Maya allowed herself exactly 10 seconds to lean against the tree trunk and catch her breath. Then duty took over. Maya pulled out her compass and emergency GPS device, grateful that both had survived the fall intact. The helicopter crash site was approximately 200 meters uphill from her position. She could still see the orange glow through the trees, though it seemed to be dimming. Time was running out. Moving through the forest with a broken wrist and dislocated shoulder was like navigating an obstacle course designed by a sadist. Every step brought new challenges, fallen logs that had to be climbed over, dense undergrowth that caught at her equipment, root systems that threatened to trip her in the darkness. Maya pushed forward anyway, driven by the knowledge that her teammates needed her. The sound reached her before the sight did. Men's voices speaking in a language she didn't recognize, but the tone was unmistakable. Someone was at the crash site ahead of her, and they weren't American search and rescue. Maya dropped into a crouch behind a large boulder, drawing her sidearm with her good hand. Through the trees, she could see figures moving around the burning wreckage of the Black Hawk. They were dressed in civilian clothes, but moved with military precision, and they all carried automatic weapons. Hostile forces had found her team first. Maya counted at least 8 men, possibly more hidden in the shadows. They were systematically searching the crash site, probably looking for survivors to capture or eliminate. Maya's mind raced as she tried to formulate a plan. She was one injured soldier against a superior force, armed only with a pistol and whatever equipment had survived her fall. But Maya Rodriguez was a United States Army Ranger, and Rangers never left their teammates behind. She began to circle around the crash site, staying low and using the terrain for concealment. Her broken wrist throbbed with every movement, but Maya pushed the pain into a dark corner of her mind where it couldn't interfere with her mission. She had been trained to operate through injury, and tonight would test every lesson she had learned. As Maya moved closer to the wreckage, she could see Captain Hayes trapped under a piece of twisted metal, unconscious but breathing. Thompson was nearby, clutching his arm and trying to stay quiet despite obvious pain. Martinez appeared to be dead, his body lying motionless in an unnatural position. The hostile forces were closing in on Hayes and Thompson, their weapons raised. Maya knew she had only moments before her surviving teammates were either killed or captured. She was their only hope, a single wounded soldier against impossible odds. Maya had always wondered what she would do in a moment like this, when everything she had trained for came down to one critical decision. Now she knew. She was going to remind these men why you should never underestimate a United States Army Ranger, even one who had just fallen out of a helicopter without a parachute. Especially one who had just fallen out of a helicopter without a parachute. Maya Rodriguez had always been told she was too small, too young, too female to be a real Ranger. Tonight, she was going to prove that genetics mattered far less than determination, training mattered more than size, and that when a Ranger was pushed to the edge, she didn't fall. She flew. The enemy soldiers were about to learn what the 75th Ranger Regiment meant when they said, "Rangers lead the way." Maya checked her pistol one more time, counted her remaining ammunition, and prepared to do what Rangers do best, accomplish the impossible against overwhelming odds. The forest around her seemed to hold its breath as she planned her attack, every shadow and sound becoming part of her tactical calculation. 300 feet above this same spot, Maya Rodriguez had been just another soldier on a routine mission. Now, with broken bones and blood on her face, she had become something more dangerous, a Ranger, with nothing left to lose and everything to prove. The real fight was about to begin. Maya forced herself to think like the weapon she had been trained to become. Pain was just information now, and fear was a luxury she couldn't afford. She studied the hostile forces through the flickering orange light of the burning helicopter, noting their positions, their weapons, their patterns of movement. 8 men total, spread in a loose perimeter around the crash site. Professional, but not perfect. The closest enemy soldier stood 30 meters away, his back turned as he searched through scattered equipment. Maya could see an AK-47 slung across his shoulder, and what appeared to be night vision goggles pushed up on his forehead. These weren't local militia. They were too well equipped, too disciplined. Someone with serious resources had been waiting for this helicopter to go down. Maya slipped her broken wrist into her tactical vest, creating a makeshift sling. The pain flared white-hot for a moment, then settled into a steady throb that she could manage. Her right shoulder was still functional despite the dislocation, though lifting her arm above her head sent lightning bolts down her spine. She would have to work with what she had. Captain Hayes groaned softly under the twisted metal that pinned him to the ground. The sound carried in the still night air, and Maya saw 2 of the enemy soldiers turn toward him. One of them said something in what sounded like Russian and began walking in Hayes's direction, his rifle ready. Maya had perhaps 15 seconds before they discovered that Hayes was alive. Once they did, he would either be executed or dragged away for interrogation. Neither option was acceptable. She moved like a ghost through the forest, using every shadow and every piece of cover the terrain provided. Maya had always been naturally quiet, but Ranger School had taught her to become invisible even in broad daylight. Now, with darkness as her ally and desperation fueling her movements, she became something that existed only in the periphery of enemy awareness. The soldier approaching Hayes never saw her coming. Maya emerged from behind a fallen log like a shadow-given substance, her combat knife appearing in her good hand with practiced smoothness. The blade found the spot between his ribs with surgical precision, angled upward toward the heart. He died without making a sound. Maya caught the falling body and lowered it quietly to the ground, already moving toward her next target. 7 left. The second soldier was kneeling beside Thompson, rifle pointed at his head while he spoke into a radio. Maya could hear fragments of conversation, coordinates, casualty reports, requests for transportation. They weren't just hunting survivors. They were calling for backup. Maya approached from the blind spot created by the helicopter's twisted tail section. This soldier was more alert than the first, his head turning constantly as he maintained situational awareness. Maya had to time her approach perfectly, waiting for the moment when his attention was focused on the radio transmission. She struck during the pause between radio exchanges when the soldier turned to check on his deceased partner. Maya's knife found his throat in a single fluid motion, severing arteries and windpipe before he could cry out. The radio fell from his hand, crackling with voices demanding a response that would never come. 6 left. But now Maya faced a new problem. The remaining soldiers were spread too far apart for silent elimination, and they would soon notice their missing comrades. She needed a different strategy. Maya salvaged what she could from the 2 dead soldiers: extra ammunition, a flashbang grenade, and most importantly, one of their radios. She couldn't understand the language, but she could listen to their communications and get a sense of their coordination. Captain Hayes was stirring more frequently now, trying to shift the metal debris that held him down. Maya could see that his legs were trapped, but his upper body was free. If she could create enough distraction, he might be able to provide covering fire while she extracted Thompson. Maya studied the crash site layout one more time. The helicopter had come down in a rough triangle of large pine trees, creating natural cover positions. The remaining 6 enemies were positioned to watch all the obvious escape routes. But they had made one critical mistake. They were all facing outward, watching for threats from the forest. They weren't expecting an attack from inside their own perimeter. Maya had been taught that the most dangerous enemy was the one you didn't see coming. Tonight, she was going to be that enemy. She pulled the pin from the flashbang grenade and counted down from 5, then hurled it toward the cluster of soldiers on the far side of the wreckage. The explosion lit up the forest like daylight for a split second, followed by shouts of confusion and temporary blindness. Maya was already moving before the echo faded, sprinting through the smoke and chaos toward Captain Hayes. She could hear enemy soldiers calling to each other, trying to re-establish communications and figure out what had happened. Their discipline was holding, but confusion was buying her precious seconds. "Hayes," Maya whispered as she reached her captain. "Can you hear me?" Captain Hayes opened his eyes and focused on her face with visible effort. Blood trickled from a cut on his forehead, but his eyes were alert. "Rodriguez, how the hell did you survive that fall?" "Rangers don't need parachutes, sir," Maya replied, already working to shift the metal debris that pinned his legs. "We need to move. Hostiles are closing in." Together, they managed to lift the twisted piece of helicopter frame just enough for Hayes to pull his legs free. Maya could see that his left leg was badly injured, probably broken, but he was mobile. That was what mattered. "Thompson's still alive," Hayes said, pointing toward where their teammate lay motionless. "Martinez didn't make it." "I know, sir. I've got a plan, but I need you to provide covering fire." Maya handed Hayes the rifle she had taken from the first soldier she had killed. His eyes widened slightly when he realized what that meant. She had already engaged the enemy and won. He asked no questions, simply checked the weapon and nodded his readiness. "On my signal," Maya said. "Give them something to shoot at." Maya circled wide through the forest, using the confusion from the flashbang to reposition herself. The remaining enemy soldiers had formed a defensive line, their backs to each other as they tried to identify threats. Professional response, but it left Thompson exposed in the middle of their formation. Maya keyed the captured radio and began speaking loudly in English, hoping to draw attention to the sound source. It worked. 3 soldiers immediately turned toward the radio transmission, weapons raised. At that moment, Hayes opened fire from his position, forcing them to take cover. Maya used the distraction to reach Thompson's position. Her teammate was unconscious, but breathing steadily, blood seeping from what looked like a concussion rather than any life-threatening wound. Maya grabbed him under the arms and began dragging him toward the tree line. The enemy soldiers realized what was happening and opened fire, automatic weapons chattering in the night air. Maya felt bullets whining past her head as she hauled Thompson's limp form across the rough ground. Her dislocated shoulder screamed in protest, but she refused to let go. Captain Hayes was laying down suppressing fire, forcing the enemy to keep their heads down. But Maya could hear his rifle clicking empty, and she knew he was almost out of ammunition. They had perhaps 30 seconds before the enemy rushed their position. Maya reached the relative safety of a large fallen tree and pulled Thompson behind it just as Hayes's rifle fell silent. The enemy soldiers immediately began advancing, their weapons trained on Hayes's position. Maya knew her captain was about to be overrun. That was when Maya Rodriguez stopped being a soldier following orders and became something more primal, a ranger protecting her pack. Maya drew her sidearm and stood up from behind the log, presenting herself as a target. "Hey!" she shouted at the advancing soldiers. "Looking for me?" The enemy formation immediately shifted toward her, exactly as she had hoped. Maya had studied the psychology of combat, and she knew that human nature favored engaging the most immediate threat. By making herself visible, she was drawing fire away from Hayes and creating an opportunity for counterattack. Maya fired 3 precise shots, dropping the lead soldier before diving for cover as return fire shredded the bark around her head. But her sacrifice play had worked. Hayes was using the distraction to reposition himself to a better defensive position, and Thompson was beginning to regain consciousness. "Rodriguez, what's your status?" Hayes called out. "Still breathing, sir. Still fighting." Maya counted 4 remaining enemies, and they were being more cautious now. They had realized that the female soldier who had fallen from the helicopter was far more dangerous than they had expected. They were beginning to spread out, trying to flank her position. Maya knew she was running out of time and options. Her ammunition was limited, her injuries were slowing her down, and enemy reinforcements were probably en route. But she also knew something that her opponents didn't understand. She was exactly where a ranger belonged, in an impossible situation with no good options and everything to lose. Thompson sat up slowly, his hand going to his head. "What's happening?" "We're outnumbered and surrounded," Maya replied matter-of-factly. "Standard Tuesday night." Thompson managed a weak smile despite their situation. "What's the plan?" "The plan is we don't die here," Maya said. "Hayes, how's that leg?" "I can move," came the captain's reply. "Not fast, but I can move." Maya looked at her teammates, one with a head injury, one with a broken leg, and herself with a broken wrist and dislocated shoulder. By any reasonable assessment, they were finished. But rangers weren't paid to be reasonable. Maya had always believed that courage wasn't the absence of fear. It was the decision to act in spite of fear. Tonight, fear was telling her to surrender, to hope for prisoner exchange, to accept that some battles couldn't be won. Maya Rodriguez told fear to go to hell. "New plan," she announced to her teammates. "We're going to show these people what happens when you mess with United States Army Rangers." The enemy soldiers were closing in from 3 directions, their weapons ready, their tactics sound. They had superior numbers, better equipment, and the advantage of higher ground. By every measure of conventional warfare, they should have won this engagement before it started. But there was one factor they hadn't calculated into their tactical assessment. They were facing soldiers who had been forged in the furnace of Ranger training, who had sworn an oath to never leave a fallen comrade, and who would rather die fighting than live knowing they had quit. Maya checked her remaining ammunition one more time, said a prayer to whatever gods protected crazy people and professional soldiers, and prepared to remind the world why the 75th Ranger Regiment had never lost a battle. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath as enemy voices called out positions and closing distances. Thompson struggled to his feet, using his rifle as a crutch. Hayes prepared his final magazine. Maya Rodriguez, who 6 hours ago had been just another soldier on a routine mission, had become the tip of the spear. Rangers lead the way. Tonight, she was going to prove exactly what that meant. Maya knew that the next 60 seconds would determine whether her team lived or died. 4 enemy soldiers were converging on their position from different angles, their tactics sound and their weapons deadly. But Maya had spent 3 years learning to think like a predator, and predators understood something that prey never could. Sometimes the best defense was an attack so aggressive it defied all logic. "Hayes, Thompson," Maya whispered into her radio. "When I move, you move. We're going through them, not around them." "Rodriguez, you can't be serious," Hayes replied. "We're wounded and outnumbered." "Sir, respectfully, they think we're trapped. They're wrong. We're not trapped with them. They're trapped with us." Maya had learned in Ranger School that the human mind had a hard time processing actions that contradicted expectations. The enemy soldiers expected them to hide, to retreat, to try to escape through the forest. They weren't prepared for a frontal assault from injured soldiers who should have been seeking cover. Maya stood up from behind the fallen log and began walking directly toward the nearest enemy position, her pistol raised and firing. Not running, not crouching for cover, just walking forward like death itself had taken human form. Her first shot dropped the soldier who had been flanking their left side. Her second shot forced the man behind him to dive for cover. Thompson and Hayes understood immediately and followed her lead, providing covering fire as Maya advanced across ground that should have been impossible to cross. The psychological effect was devastating. Suddenly, the hunters weren't sure who was hunting whom. Maya's broken wrist sent spikes of agony up her arm with every shot, but she had learned to compartmentalize pain until it became just another piece of information to be processed and filed away. Her dislocated shoulder limited her range of motion, but Rangers were trained to fight through injuries that would incapacitate ordinary soldiers. The third enemy soldier made the mistake of standing up to get a better shot at Maya's advancing form. Maya put 2 round center mass before he could pull his trigger, then immediately shifted to engage the 4th target. Her ammunition was almost exhausted, but she had closed the distance enough that accuracy mattered more than volume of fire. The 4th soldier was smarter than his companions. He stayed behind cover and waited for Maya to come to him, his rifle trained on the gap between 2 trees that she would have to cross. It was a good tactical decision that should have ended the firefight in his favor. But Maya Rodriguez had been taught to see opportunities where other people saw only obstacles. Instead of crossing between the trees, Maya grabbed a broken branch from the ground and hurled it across the gap, drawing the soldier's fire. While he was shooting at the branch, Maya used his muzzle flash to locate his exact position, then put her last 2 rounds through the thin pine bark he was using for cover. The forest fell silent except for the distant crackling of the burning helicopter. Maya lowered her empty pistol and looked around the battlefield. 4 enemy soldiers lay motionless among the pine trees. Her teammates were still alive, still breathing, still fighting. Somehow, impossibly, they had won. "Status report," Maya called out. "Hayes here. Legs broken, but I'm mobile," came the captain's voice. "Thompson, concussion, but I can function," reported their teammate. Maya took inventory of her own condition. Her broken wrist was swelling rapidly inside her tactical glove. Her shoulder felt like it was on fire. Cuts and bruises covered most of her exposed skin. But she was alive, her team was alive, and the immediate threat had been neutralized. "We need to move," Maya said. "Those soldiers were calling for backup before we engaged them. More are coming." Hayes tried to stand and nearly fell over. His broken leg wouldn't support his weight without assistance. Thompson was steady on his feet, but moving slowly, his head injury affecting his balance. Maya realized that she was the only member of the team capable of sustained movement. "Sir, I'm going to scout for an extraction route," Maya announced. "Stay here and maintain defensive positions. Rodriguez, you're injured too. We stick together. Sir, with respect, you can't move fast enough. Thompson needs medical attention. I need to find us a way out of here before enemy reinforcements arrive. Captain Hayes looked at Maya for a long moment, reading the determination in her eyes. He had commanded Rangers for 8 years, and he recognized the look of a soldier who had moved beyond following orders and into the realm of pure professional competence. 30 minutes, Hayes said. If you're not back in 30 minutes, we assume you're compromised and call for our own extraction. Roger that, sir. Maya disappeared into the forest like she had been born there. Her injured wrist was tucked securely into her vest, and she had learned to compensate for her shoulder injury by adjusting her movement patterns. Pain was no longer a factor. It was simply part of the background noise of staying alive. Maya moved through the darkness using skills that had been drilled into her through countless hours of training. She read the forest like a book, understanding how sound carried, where shadows fell, how to use natural cover to remain invisible. Every tree and rock became part of her tactical arsenal. 3 kilometers from the crash site, Maya found what she was looking for. A small clearing large enough for a helicopter landing zone, with good approaches from multiple directions and natural cover for defensive positions. More importantly, it was positioned along a ridge line that would give them clear lines of sight in all directions. Maya used her emergency GPS to mark the coordinates, then began the journey back to her teammates. But as she moved through the forest, she heard something that made her blood run cold. Vehicles approaching on the mountain road below. Multiple engines moving fast, heading toward the crash site. The enemy reinforcements had arrived. Maya keyed her radio. Hayes, Rodriguez, we've got company coming up the mountain road. Multiple vehicles, probably squad-sized element or larger. Copy that, Rodriguez. What's your recommendation? Maya studied the tactical situation as she moved. The enemy would reach the crash site in perhaps 10 minutes. Her injured teammates couldn't move fast enough to evade a fresh search party. Fighting was out of the question. They were almost out of ammunition and in no condition for another engagement. But Maya Rodriguez had been trained to find solutions where other people saw only problems. Sir, I've got an idea, but you're not going to like it, Maya transmitted. Let's hear it. The enemy is expecting to find survivors at the crash site. I say we give them what they expect, but not where they expect it. Maya's plan was audacious, dangerous, and completely insane. It was also their only chance. Maya reached her teammates just as the sound of vehicle engines became audible through the trees. Hayes and Thompson had used the time to prepare defensive positions, but Maya could see that they were both weakening from their injuries and blood loss. Here's what we're going to do, Maya explained quickly. I'm going to create a diversion that draws the main force away from this area. While they're chasing shadows, you two move to the extraction point I've marked. I'll join you there after I've led them on a wild goose chase. Absolutely not, Hayes replied immediately. We don't split up the team. Sir, we don't have a choice. You can't move fast enough, and they'll track us down within an hour if we stay together. This is our only option. Thompson looked at Maya with something approaching awe. You're going to take on an entire squad by yourself? I'm not going to fight them, Maya said. I'm going to play hide and seek, and I'm very good at hide and seek. Before either of her teammates could object further, Maya was already moving. She had salvaged what little equipment she could carry, some ammunition from the dead soldiers, a smoke grenade, and a small explosive charge that had survived the helicopter crash. Not much, but enough to create chaos. Maya positioned herself 200 meters from the crash site, in a location where she could observe the enemy's arrival while remaining concealed. When the vehicles appeared, 3 military trucks carrying at least 20 soldiers. She was ready. Maya waited until the soldiers had dismounted and begun searching the crash site before she acted. She triggered the smoke grenade first, filling the area with thick gray clouds that obscured vision and created confusion. Then she began firing single shots from different positions, using her mobility to create the impression of multiple defenders. The effect was exactly what she had hoped for. The enemy force immediately assumed they were under attack from a larger group and began deploying in a defensive formation. Radio chatter increased as unit leaders tried to coordinate their response to what they believed was an ambush. Maya used the confusion to plant her explosive charge on one of the vehicles, then disappeared back into the forest. When the charge detonated 5 minutes later, it created the impression that the American survivors had heavy weapons and were conducting a coordinated attack. The enemy commander made exactly the decision Maya had predicted. He committed his entire force to hunting down the terrorist cell that was attacking his men. They began a systematic sweep of the forest, moving away from the crash site and directly away from the route Hayes and Thompson were using to reach the extraction point. Maya spent the next 2 hours playing the most deadly game of tag in military history. She would fire a few shots from one position, then disappear before the enemy could respond. She used noise to create false contacts, left false trail signs to mislead tracking teams, and exploited every weakness in their search pattern. By the time the enemy realized they were chasing a single operator, Maya had led them over 6 kilometers away from her teammates' escape route. More importantly, she had bought enough time for Hayes and Thompson to reach the extraction coordinates and call for emergency rescue. Maya heard the sound of American helicopters arriving just as enemy soldiers finally cornered her in a rocky ravine that offered no escape routes. She was down to her last magazine, her injuries were severely limiting her mobility, and she was facing at least 8 fresh soldiers who were angry about being led on a cross-country chase. But Maya Rodriguez was a United States Army Ranger, and Rangers never quit. Maya keyed her radio one last time. Hayes Rodriguez, package is secure. Repeat, package is secure. Rodriguez, we've got 2 Apaches inbound to your position. Mark your location with smoke. Maya almost laughed. After everything that had happened tonight, falling from a helicopter without a parachute, surviving a forest canopy landing with broken bones, eliminating enemy soldiers in close combat, and conducting a single-handed diversion operation against superior forces, rescue was coming down to whether she could light a smoke grenade before enemy soldiers overran her position. Maya pulled the pin from her last smoke canister and threw it as far as she could into the ravine. Orange smoke billowed up into the morning sky just as the Apache attack helicopters crested the ridgeline above her. What happened next was less a battle than a demonstration of why the United States military spent more on defense than most countries spent on everything. The Apaches engaged the enemy soldiers with precision that was almost surgical, neutralizing threats while carefully avoiding Maya's position in the smoke. Within minutes, the forest was quiet again. A rescue helicopter landed in the ravine 20 minutes later, and Maya watched Captain Hayes and Thompson limp toward her with expressions of disbelief on their faces. Rodriguez, Hayes said when he reached her, I've been in the Army for 15 years, and I've never seen anything like what you did tonight. Maya looked down at her broken wrist, her torn uniform, her battered equipment. Then she looked at her teammates, alive, rescued, and safe because she had refused to accept that some battles couldn't be won. Sir, Maya replied, I just did what Rangers do. We lead the way. 6 months later, Maya Rodriguez stood at attention in a ceremony room at Fort Benning, Georgia. Her left wrist was still in a cast, but her uniform was perfectly pressed, and her bearing was that of a soldier who had looked death in the eye and walked away from the encounter. General Patricia Morrison, the first female commanding general of the 75th Ranger Regiment, stepped forward to read the citation. Staff Sergeant Maya Rodriguez is awarded the Silver Star for gallantry in action against an enemy of the United States. After being ejected from her aircraft at 300 feet above ground level without a parachute, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez survived impact with the forest canopy, sustained multiple injuries, and immediately moved to rescue her trapped teammates from hostile forces. Through exceptional tactical thinking and personal courage under fire, she eliminated multiple enemy combatants, extracted her team from an untenable position, and conducted a single-handed diversion operation that enabled their successful rescue. General Morrison pinned the medal to Maya's uniform and leaned close to whisper, "Some people still think women don't belong in the Rangers. What do you think we should tell them?" Maya Rodriguez smiled, thinking about a night 6 months ago when she had fallen from the sky and landed in a situation that should have killed her. Instead, she had proven something that every ranger already knew, but the world was still learning. "Ma'am," Maya replied, "I think we should tell them that rangers don't need parachutes to fly. We just need a mission and the will to complete it." General Morrison smiled back. "Hoo-yah, Ranger!" "Hoo-yah!" Maya Rodriguez had fallen from a helicopter without a parachute and lived to tell about it. But more than that, she had proven that when you push a ranger to the edge, you don't find their breaking point. You find their true strength. Rangers lead the way. Maya Rodriguez had led her team through the impossible and back again, proving that sometimes the most dangerous person in any fight is the one who refuses to accept that they can't win. The medal was nice, but Maya knew the real reward was simpler. Captain Hayes and Thompson were alive, and they were going home. In the end, that was what Rangers really fought for. Not glory, not recognition, but the sacred promise that no one gets left behind. Maya Rodriguez had kept that promise even after falling from the sky.